All right, welcome to Talking Investing. I'm Tom, and as always, this is not financial advice. Today, I want to do our weekly Bitcoin and Bitcoin miner update. We're going to compare what Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners did week over week. Then I want to take a look at the Bitcoin chart itself. Something has happened on the Bitcoin chart over the last few months that has not happened in over 6 years. So I want to point that out because I think it's something very important and it's something to keep our eye on. But let's start out with the good news. All these charts look better than they have really in 6 months. So if we look at where all the Bitcoin miners closed on Friday versus the previous Friday, you're going to see some monumental moves here. So at the top side of this list, you have Any, which is Sphere 3D, up 93% on the week. You have Core Scientific up 75% on the week. Bitfarms was up 56%, Argo Blockchain 50%. Then you have CleanSpark 35%, TerraWolf 34%. As we've been talking about on the channel for the last 2 months, the Bitcoin miners are now starting to outperform Bitcoin. We had a 4-month period that was absolutely brutal. We're going to take a look at that chart in a few minutes where Bitcoin was doing well. It took out its highs from the summer, and the Bitcoin miners were still down 40, 50, 60, 70%. Well, that has now changed. And you can see this week in particular, this was the biggest week probably of the run so far. Now, like I've also been saying, there are going to be some winners and some losers. We had 7 Bitcoin miners this week that underperformed Bitcoin. We've been through months and months of red chart after red chart after red chart. You're going to see most of these charts are now turning green in a big way. Okay, now I want to take a look at the last 8 weeks, which is basically about 2 months. And the reason we're looking at this is about 2 months ago, Bitcoin took out its highs from the summer. Bitcoin is now 66% above its highs from July of 2023. So the entire year, when we look at that, you're going to see Bitcoin is up massively on the year. But even from the July highs until now, another big move up, 66%. For the first time, this 8-week window is 100% green. So every Bitcoin miner is up over the last 8 weeks. But still, you're seeing winners and losers. You're seeing some of these significantly outperform others. There are 3 that have really separated themselves. CleanSpark's up 194% in this 8-week window of time. So RIOT is down here up 73%, while Marathon's up 118%. So there's starting to be a little bit of separation for the time being between those two. We have 10 of the Bitcoin miners. I follow 19 Bitcoin miners on the channel. 10 of them in the last 2 months have outperformed Bitcoin. 9 of them are lagging behind Bitcoin, and you can see the differences are big. Okay, so this is the chart that I think is very significant. This is the last 21 weeks. This measures from the time that Bitcoin hit its high in the summer. Now, since then, Bitcoin has passed that high. It's now up 47% in these 21 weeks, but you can see almost every single miner is still in the red. Now, this chart might not look good. The vast majority of this chart is in the red, but I'm going to show you what this looked like a few months ago. This chart was an absolute disaster. You're going to see a lot of these under 20 or at 20%. I just want to show you what this looked like a few months ago because this situation did seem hopeless. I know, congratulations to those of you who held on to these stocks or dollar cost averaged in during this time because that decision has paid off. That's a strategy we talk about all the time on this channel. And again, I'm not telling you guys to buy these stocks or sell these stocks. You guys obviously have to do your own due diligence. You know your own personal time frames, your own personal risk tolerance. So for each person, this is going to be a different decision. Okay, so this was week 14 on the same chart. So we are now at week 21. So 7 weeks ago, you can see the majority of these Bitcoin miners were down between 50 and 55% in these 14 weeks. And you're going to see Bitcoin here in gold down only 2%. So 7 weeks ago, Bitcoin essentially was back to its highs from this summer, and the Bitcoin miners were all down fairly disastrously. So it seemed almost unimaginable at this point that we would be getting some of these Bitcoin miners back into the green, but we now have 2 that are significantly into the green. So remember this chart, and I'm going to go back to this week's. If we go back to this chart as of right now, CleanSpark's now up 50%, Bitfarms is up 31%, and Marathon, remember, which was down 51% just 7 weeks ago, is now only down 7%. So this is getting very close to going into the green. So I talked several weeks ago that I thought a bunch of these would get into the green before year end. Now, we only have about 3 weeks left, so we'll see what happens because also it is important to note that we could have a pullback in the middle. So this is a chart year to date. We're almost done with this year. We have 3 weeks left in the year. And finally, this is starting to look like what we expect the Bitcoin miners to look like in relationship to Bitcoin. The first thing worth noting on this chart is Bitcoin is now up 168% year to date. So Bitcoin has had a massive bull run this year. This has been a very good year. Obviously, last year was a disaster for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. We were, in a bear market. We were in a crypto winter. It felt like it was going to last forever. But we have made big moves. We're actually way ahead of schedule versus the typical 4-year cycle. To put it in perspective, the NASDAQ, which outperformed all the other major indexes, was up 39% in that same period of time, and that is a spectacular year. So, Bitcoin, when it does its thing, significantly outperforms the market, and the Bitcoin miners significantly outperform Bitcoin. It's worth noting that year to date, we still do have 3 Bitcoin miners that are in the red: Stronghold, Mawson, and Any. And it's interesting because if we look at the two ends of this chart, Core Scientific's up 832%. That's the highest on the entire chart. Any is down 20%. That's the lowest on the entire chart. If we just go to this week's, if we go back and look at this week's performance, you're going to see Any and Core Scientific were the #1 and #2 performers of the week with gigantic monster moves. Any was up 93% this week. Even with that move, when you go year to date, it's still down 20% in the red on the year. I do think the market is still trying to make up their mind, particularly on these 3 stocks that are in the red. I do think there's some others that the market's a little skeptical about. Now, the market's not always right, so you don't have to do what the market's doing. I do these charts to add to, your world of due diligence. So, use them in any way that you think might be useful. But I always like to remind everybody, please be extremely careful. What we just looked at, what this chart shows very clearly is the Bitcoin miners are leveraged plays on Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's an extremely volatile asset. So the volatility here is very large. The risk here is very large. Now, on the flip side, the reward is very large, right? We're looking at some of these stocks up approaching 500%. Core Scientific's up over 800%. So these are the types of moves that can happen. I do believe the real bull market has not yet even begun for Bitcoin. Typically that happens sometime, between 6 and 12 months after the halving. Now, there's no telling that that's going to be what happens in this cycle, but that is what has happened in all of the previous cycles, which is only a sample group of 3. So I would caution people to be careful. I don't think it's fair to assume that these 4-year cycles are going to continue to be the same year after year. There's a lot of new factors that have been introduced since the last 4-year cycle and since the last halving. We're now just a little bit over 4 months away from the next halving, so that's obviously a significant event that's up and coming. I do want to show everybody one other thing. There's something that happened right now with this weekly candle closing that has not happened in over 6 years. If we go to the Bitcoin chart, you're going to see the last 8 weekly candles in a row have all been green. That has not happened since June of 2017. In that period of time, we've had 5 or 6 times where Bitcoin had 7 green weekly candles in a row. Most recently was over 3 years ago. So, this hasn't happened in a long time. And now we just finished week 8. And not only was week 8 a green candle, but it was one of the biggest green candles in the whole run. So we will see if this run continues. But I bring this up because this is a fairly historic event. Like I said, it hasn't occurred in about 6.5 years. Even 7 in a row hasn't occurred in over 3 years. So I've been saying that we're very, very overbought. We are very much due for a pullback, in my opinion. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen this week. We're already several weeks past where the technicals were saying we should get a pullback. So when Bitcoin has these runs, it can continue to run. But I only say this because I know a lot of people will panic if we do start to have a pullback, but it's important to remember we did have 3 20% pullbacks just in the year 2023. And we're now almost at the end of that year, and Bitcoin's up 168%. So even within that 168% move to the upside, we had 3, decent pullbacks. That's a very normal thing. It's a very healthy thing for Bitcoin. 20% is a very small amount. You can see the big moves that Bitcoin makes. So this is 8 weeks in a row. This is a fairly historic run. It may continue. I do think there's room for this to continue. I will tell you here on Sunday night when I'm making this video, and you guys may be watching it on Monday or Tuesday, on Sunday night, Bitcoin is pulling back a little. It's pulled back about $1,000 over the weekend. We'll see. By the time you're watching this, that may have reversed, or we may be in the middle of, the first pullback in 8 weeks to go maybe retest and find a line of support somewhere. So either way, I'm not going to be that concerned. I did think that was worth pointing out, though. It's something that hasn't happened in years and years and years. So that's everything that happened with Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners this last week. I will let everybody know that on Wednesday is the Fed meeting. So we're going to see, if we get a rate hike or a rate cut. The market is pricing in like about a 1% chance of that happening. So thanks so much for watching, and we will see you guys in the next video.